Daniel, good to see you. Thanks for making a bit of time to come and have a chat. When we last spoke, you said to me, one of the things that interests you is how do you put community at the heart of a business model? Why do you say that, and why is it important in terms of what you're trying to do?
Well, thanks for having me first, Paul. Very nice to be with you. Uh, I do, yeah, I do indeed believe that community should sit at the heart of the business model, and I think the key distinction is that I'm not talking about community as a nice brand idea or like a soft marketing layer
Right.
or campaign, or indeed a Facebook group bolted onto the side of a business. I think for a long time community's been treated as something that sits around the business, right, rather than at the center of it. And I think it's seen often, and you look at marketing agencies, you look at their websites, how they talk about community, seen as social media, it's seen as events, loyalty, content, some kind of customer engagement, all useful things, of course, no question, but often quite disconnected from the commercial engine. So my view slash thesis slash hope is that this is changing. And actually, that community is becoming what I'd call business infrastructure. It's not just sort of brand icing or cherry on top,
So
whichever
let me just
metaphor.
quickly ask you about that. So you're saying you hope it changes, or you are trying to change it?
Both.
Go on. So just tell me, why do you want to change it in particular?
Well, because I think there is a huge opportunity
Right.
uh, if you at least psychologically, if as well as operationally, think about community at the heart of your business operation. Sometimes people interpret community as an online group where people gather. Actually, community can live without any particular gathering of people. It's more of a connective tissue which brings together all the assets of a business. Assets by which I mean could be audience, customers, fans, as well as the content and the events and the data and so on. And I think the businesses which are strongest now increasingly don't just acquire customers and transact with them, which is the sort of the convention. And it's, I think, it's placed if you think about community touching the different parts of your business from product to sales to marketing to customer service. Strong businesses or progressively minded businesses are creating systems where customers, members, fans, partners, advocates, employees, sometimes maybe even suppliers as well, become part of the value creation. There is a sense of co-ownership and invested
Right.
identity there, so that all those different stakeholders, they refer, they contribute, they feed back, they open doors, they create, they build
But
trust, and
I
that
get,
compounds in value, by the way.
yeah, no, I mean, I get that point, and that's a well-made point about compounding in value as well. I think that's a really important point. Give us an example of a company that people that are perhaps watching the podcast that people would know and recognise as having done something like that. I mean, the one that's going through my mind is Harley Davidson. I mean, you might have other better examples, but talk us through an example of someone that's done it well.
I mean, Christianity is quite a good one.
Right. Okay.
Uh,
Why do you say that?
all right, Christianity is a very easy example. Well, it's relatively speaking stood the test of time, perhaps despite
Yeah.
diminishing numbers. If you think about any good communities typically have three pillars as part of them. Harley would also be like this. I mean, Gymshark, Patagonia, Rafa Cycling, these are all good examples of strong community senses of belonging and identity. But communities have three things. They have artifacts, which are the sort of visual or tangible things which are associated
Yeah.
with that community. And in the case of Christianity, it is the Bible. That's
Yeah.
a physical artifact, which I mean, in simple terms. The rituals of Christianity is that you go to church on a weekly basis, simply in simple terms, and the roles are like priests and vicars within the kind of accepted hierarchy of how that community works, who are the glue who hold it together. I think it's a sort of a simple example, but probably resonates. And all good communities have that. I mean, you take Harley, which is your example, very nice one. Artifacts are a couple of things. The primary artifact is probably not even the bike. That's perhaps it's an important part of it. It's the uniform. They all dress in the same way. They kind
Mm.
of look quite similar. Okay. That's all what I'd call artifact, the visual and the tangible
Yeah.
signifiers. Um, the roles, I don't know exactly what they are, but I think they will have these sort of regional chapters and which all kind of hang together. And then rituals where they all kind of hang out and go on rides together. Um,
Yeah. And
so
I mean, I think Harley's a fabulous company. I mean, personally, I'm not, I don't ride a motorbike, but I've always been impressed by the way they do things. So it's a really interesting point you make about community being at the heart of that, because people
But there's
think it's
another
about,
important thing with Harley, if I may just add, Paul, which is that Harley's probably the most extreme example. BMW bikes another, and we talked about that before as well. What good businesses do when they see community forming is they step away or they stand back. Because I think when the business start, if Harley Davidson business started stepping in and say, "Hey, look, guys, I think some of your public behavior and the way that you talk and the way that you're kind of representing us, we're not comfortable with," they get a big two fingers up. So there's a balance there. They've got to obviously
yeah.
they've got to sort of adhere to some extent. There are certain guardrails, but
Mm.
broadly speaking, they recognize that these guys, they are the brand, they are the evangelists. And that, I mean, there's no better example of sense of co-ownership and co-creation.
Mm.
It's absolutely in harness, and when it works, then it work, then it flies like that.
Yeah. I mean, the point I was about to make was that, I mean, people think that Harleys are about the bikes, but Harleys are all about the community, the owners clubs or the owners groups or whatever they are. I mean, that's really clear about that. And it's something that's transformed that business, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let me ask you though, how did you get onto this track? I mean, where did you start and why is it that you are now particularly focused on this idea of putting community at the heart of the way people build business models?
Yeah, it's a sort of an unusual path to getting to where I am, and I think if you sort of studied my background, it probably looks a bit quite non-linear from the outside. I mean, taking a step back, I mean, my career has sort of moved across different sectors and functions from sort of finance to media to sort of partnership work, venture work, startups, sport, hospitality, and indeed now community. I think the thread, if I can, if I can impose one, looking back, is that I've always been interested in how value moves between people and organizations. So who trusts whom, who opens doors, why some networks become commercially powerful and why others just remain a list of contacts. I started in more conventional commercial environments in my career, like as I said, finance and media. And then when I sort of shifted into sort of more the venture world, started working around startups, venture building. And I think over time, I just became more interested in the role of relationships in creating commercial momentum. I think if I were having a kind of a therapy session and you were trying to assess, what are my strengths? One of the things I'd always say that came naturally to me, at least, is sort of forming relationships and hustling and selling and understanding reasonably well the power of network and the power of kind of laying foundations and the slow burn value of building one's network. The practical part of all this, in terms of how did that come to life, in terms of where I am now with this chorus business, is that the real lesson came in the precursor to the chorus, which was the formation of the Sports Business Syndicate. With a couple of colleagues, we built this sports business community for senior people in the industry, and it had real energy. People were joining, sharing, they were introducing, asking for help, offering opportunities. And it showed me, really brought to life, I suppose, how a valuable high trust network can function. But then it also, I suppose, showed the difference between a lively network and then a properly designed community operating system, which is to
And
say, go ahead. Yeah,
so
go
let
on.
me just ask you about that. So you're saying there's a difference, because that's a really interesting point. You're saying there's a difference between a network of, actively involved people and a designed community. I mean, just give people a flavor of how you see that difference. Because one of
Yeah.
the things I see is people using the term community and the term network almost interchangeably. But you're saying it's something different, I think. Is that right?
Well, there is a difference, although I don't think it's. I'm not sort of talking about semantics so much between network and community, which are synonymous. In a way, network is perhaps the more valuable term because it reflects the sort of scientific mathematical qualities of
Right.
network and of community, which is the sort of the formation of kind of atomic units, which effectively means the smallest number of people or parts of a network for it to function to have what I call minimal network effect. And community can be a bit of a misnomer, but essentially we're sort of talking about the same thing. The differentiation I was really making is that you can have lots of good people,
Yeah.
you can have lots of activity, you can have lots of latent value, but unless you design the system around it, by which, what does the system mean? What does that mean? It means like onboarding, roles, rituals, the way that data moves, the
Right.
commercial model, the content, the way that people find each other and introduce the partnerships. A lot of that value uh, just leaks away. It's like, I mean, an easy analogy would be why a lot of us intuitively find industry events poor
Right.
experiences,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
because they are not designed for the things I mentioned. Now, to great realistic degrees, of course, some are better than others. But what a lot of people will anecdotally say is frustrating is that there's far too much randomness, random walking, and serendipity about lots of sort of billiard balls in a big open hangar, hoping to sort of bump into each other positively. And there is always a sort of a sense, two things actually. One, that you're leaving value on the table because you haven't met the right people, although you don't even know necessarily who those right people are because you don't know who anyone is, and that because the event is so episodic and spiky in nature, as in it lasts for a very short period of time, there are inevitably a huge number of potentially valuable interactions and opportunities which you're missing because there's a lack of design either before the event,
Yeah.
during the event, or after the event.
So let me ask you about that because that's a really interesting point that you're making, and I'm one of those people that hate those kind of events, and I
Yeah,
try and positively avoid them for the
yeah.
reasons you just said. So, if somebody was to come to you and say, "Look, I want to design an event that would where people would have a better experience," I know we haven't got time to go into any detail really, but give us a flavour of a few of the things that you would suggest people do to improve people's experience and make it, if you like, less awful. I mean, just following on from your point, I mean, just give us a flavour of the sorts of things that you mean when you talk about designing those in.
Well, the first thing I would do is map the audience. So first, if you look,
Right.
most events I think have a far bigger database than those who actually attend. So you've got
Yeah.
potentially far larger pool of people who might find value from each other.
Yeah.
That's an important point in itself, which is that like most campaigns, whether we're talking about putting an event together or any communication campaign, they are typically broadcast in nature. It is one to many. Here's my event, will you come? There'll be other people there. Here's my product, would you like to buy it? But actually, there's a huge amount of value leakage because, particularly in a B2B event environment, it might only be 10% of your audience who actually attends. So I would want to map my audience. And what you find with events is that the quality of information about delegates and general sort of database is incredibly thin. So
Right.
you'll know their name, their email, their company, and their geography, but you typically have no idea what they're interested in, what they really do, what kind of opportunities they're
Right.
seeking, and what expertise they might
So,
have to share.
so sorry, just to clarify. So you're saying two things. You're saying one, collect better data,
Right.
then use that before you run an event to think about the content of the event. Is that essentially, have I
Well,
got?
what I'm actually saying is just to go one layer of abstraction earlier is that think about the value of your community, all the people you have in your audience, and think about the event as just one spike or a small handful of spikes throughout the year, rather than the all and
Right.
everything of the
Okay.
year. Because what typically happens, of course, is that you might run one or two events a year for 2 or 3 days each, and for the rest of the year, maybe you distribute a monthly newsletter, but the challenge with that is just from a cost efficiency point of view, if not from a delegate value perspective, is that you are restarting the marketing cycle every single time. You are having to reacquire your customers. It's like if you're part of an alumni association, and you occasionally get those letters in the post saying that we're building a new music center. Would you like to donate? And your inclination is not really, thanks, but you can't just contact me every couple of years and expect me to engage because you have failed, and this is what events one should do as well, to create the positive flywheel of create a sense of identity, encourage greater participation, ongoing participation. Through that comes a greater sense of belonging. Through that comes a greater likelihood of contribution. Contribution defined as multiple ways. I'm slightly veering off your question, but only to say what you really want to do is create programs, create activity which runs throughout the year. So there is a before,
Right.
during, and after. That is the principle. How you then bring that to life it could be various ways.
Okay. Okay. I get that. And I mean, in terms of how did I mean, so I'm just curious about how this works. So how would you help a client with that? Is this a consultancy offer? Is it some kind of platform? I mean, how would you if somebody came to you and said, I want some help to create a community to get the center of my business? I mean, how does that actually work in practice?
There are typically a few phases, okay, at high level. So we are diagnosing a problem. There is a diagnosis
Right.
phase.
Yeah.
Um, what is the state of your business? Who is your audience? What problems are you looking to solve? What kind of connectivity? What kind of coherence? What kind of community are you looking for? What is the purpose of this? What is the status quo? Where is the value leaking? And then over the course of a sort of a 12-month period, what might a roadmap of activity look like? Let's lay it out and let's put milestones in place throughout so that we are go through quite a startup-y kind of incubation type of process where you are
Right.
constantly validating before you go to the next phase. And I think that's just good business practice. There's nothing necessarily specific about communities, just the way that we like to operate, which is that we recognize that trying to sort of present an upfront 12-month plan and this is how much it costs is not always wholly appealing. So you diagnose something, and then again, before going and necessarily doing a big build and design and build, let's prove something. So what are the one or two pilots that we identify which might prove the hypothesis that we've created in the diagnosis? Let's do that. If we get beyond that and we've demonstrated there's an economic case here, then let's go and design and build. I'm going to call it a system, which is a slightly abstract word, but I only use it because it could be a number of things. That could be we're going to stand up a live online community. It could be a means. It could be a sort of a customer journey driven by all sorts of different content and live events. It could be any number of things. Um, and then there is a sort of a pause point, which is, look, we've diagnosed the problem, we've proven it, and now we've built you something. At that point, you can then go and operate that and measure it yourself, or we can be your, hand-holding operational partner and run it for you. Um, those are typically the steps.
And let me ask you, I mean, and what sort of impact would that have? I mean, I hear all this stuff on YouTube about,
Yeah.
I'm going to 10x your business, and we could, I mean, in real terms, if you did something like that, what sort of impact is that likely to have on a company's business? I mean, is it very dramatic going down that road? I mean, what's the
Can be very dramatic, and we're always very careful to present the economic case in a proposal. And you touch on an interesting point, which is that, and why we were talking about communities, network, which is that community is a bit of a dangerous word because it has negative connotations for some, which is that can be presented as sort of fluffy, sort of nice to have. Well, I do lots of social media anyway. I do community. Look, I'm not. When done well, the questions that one should be asking in terms of the impact is how does this affect retention, acquisition, advocacy,
right?
frequency, spend, partnerships,
So what you're
hiring,
saying is
staff,
there's a
all those
range
things.
of ways to measure the impacts that are tangible, is your point you're making.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's what one simple example. Let's talk about advocacy, referral. Who doesn't want that flywheel in their business? I mean, we all accept as a rule of thumb that referral and word of mouth is the most powerful type of marketing. That's why we have businesses like, TripAdvisor or whatever, or that kind of mechanism is baked in to lots of businesses now that we want to read peer reviews. But And this goes back to us talking about having roles. Roles could be that, not necessarily in Christianity, of vicars and priests, but that you're creating kind of tiers and ladders of people who are have different levels of influence and access. And maybe that's because they spend more, and because of that, they are your ambassadors and representatives, and they rather naturally become evangelists for you. And if you can kind of create that because you bring those people in, they are fire starters for you. And the consequence of that, if they then refer people and encourage other people to kind of get involved, is that you can significantly reduce your customer acquisition cost. Who
Right.
doesn't want that? Be massively valuable. Again, retention. I mean, it's the other side of the coin. Again, particularly if you're operating in commoditized markets, margin compressed markets, markets, where, customers are traditionally fickle and unfaithful, you can stand out
Mm.
when there's more than just the transaction. That's ultimately the shift that you want to make, moving from audience and transaction behavior to community and participatory behavior.
I mean, that's a very interesting way to describe it, actually. And where are you going with this? I mean, what is it that you are building towards with your, give us a sense of the direction of travel.
Um, what is the direction of travel? Look, I mean, we're at the early stages. I would
Right.
say. I think one of the things I would say is that we want to build Chorus in a deliberately lean manner. I think,
Right.
traditionally agencies can be operationally people intensive. That becomes very difficult to scale. So I don't want to build a traditional bloated agency
Yeah.
where every new client means adding more people, more layers, more cost. So I think the ambition is to combine. So we're gonna get onto the other subject, which I think we combine human judgment with AI-enabled systems. There's a nice segue. So what do I mean by the reusable tools, sharper methodology, a growing proprietary knowledge base? I mean, one example, I was on a call earlier today with a partner, and talking about the diagnostic reports that we run for our prospects and our clients. And that every time you do that, you're building your proprietary database. Every time you have an interaction with one of those prospects or clients in terms of understanding more about their business, that all builds inside.
I mean, I was just about to ask you about that. I mean, you mentioned AI. I mean,
Yeah.
how does AI play out in this scenario then? I mean, are you purely using it internally? Are you using it as a way to create, as it were, as a tool to build the community? I mean, it just gives a flavour of how AI fits in here.
I think for us, it means that information, I think for everyone, becomes less of an advantage.
Yeah.
And the way I think about it is that judgment is the advantage, because sometimes having debates about the value of our intelligence reports, which are hybrid outcomes of human intelligence and artificial intelligence. But as we know, building the tools, the tech stack to create that is not a gimme by any stretch of the imagination. But the barriers to entry to do that, if you've got the right expertise and time investment, means that you know more of us than before can have a go. So I suppose, what am I saying? AI can give us enormous leverage. Obviously, it can help us research faster, it can help us summarize faster, draft things, analyze, pressure test ideas faster. It can help us model different scenarios faster, and obviously all the sort of operational automations that massively reduce the cost of experimentation for us. But I think all that's important. It means that allows us that we can stay leaner than a traditional agency. But AI does not remove, as I said, the need for human judgment. In fact, it probably makes all that more important, because, as I say, if everyone can produce more and research more and generate more optionality, then the scarcer skill is it not? I mean, I'd be interested in your opinion on this. Becomes knowing what matters. So then, actually, more like the challenge I find even with AI is like, what do you ignore? It becomes a sort of a crack cocaine dependency. Oh, well, the AI has told me that. And then you have to, like, wait a minute, stand back, stand up for yourself. What is your own judgment? Where is the signal versus the noise? What is true versus irrelevant? What's sort of basically what looks impressive, but may well be like commercially useless, quite frankly. Um, and then also, I suppose, and this comes on to sort of things that I've sort of reflected on about my own mistakes along the way. There are millions of things which may be technically possible, which AI has a tendency to just throw at you. But then what's actually behaviorally realistic or unrealistic?
Mm.
And that one matters a lot in our world because there's definitely a reasonable amount of kind of behavioral science and habit forming when it comes to thinking about community and how that works or not.
And how do you see as it were, the opportunity that you're trying to exploit going forward? I mean, do you feel that this idea of community being at the heart of the business model is something that is just going to happen? Or are you, as it were, is the opportunity for you to make it happen? And because my feeling is that the amount of discussion about community, whether it's accurately framed or not, has been rising for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Um, my feeling is that this is one of those things that is starting to happen more and more and more. I mean, more and more people talk about the importance of building a community around their business. Is that your sense of what's happening? I mean, how do you see the opportunity here?
I think the zeitgeist is with us.
Yeah.
And I suppose anything, I'm tempted to tell you that anything I say now for the next 30 seconds, please feel free to discount because I have to be self-aware enough to accept my bias that when I say I think the zeitgeist is with us. I genuinely do think that, but I have to be self-aware enough to know that that's what I want the world to look like, as much as I believe it. But you're right to imply that there is an education job to be done here, and that you know I think the best people in the client business to talk to are not always the CMO, although traditionally you think, oh, community sits in marketing. It's not a bad starting point because actually you've got to kind of meet client halfway. So even if you think, well, actually, it's better for me to speak to the chief growth officer or the operating officer because actually, what to the point about community sitting at the heart of the operation, you want to talk to someone who kind of sits horizontally uh, across all those things. And because you also have to, we have to accept that community, for want of a better word, is not always a usual familiar budget line item. Uh, Therefore, it requires sensitive positioning. It requires sort of thoughtful explanation. And as we know, we've talked about it a bit even here and before that it's not like saying I do influencer marketing, I do social media, I do advertising strategy. There isn't like a five-word explanation which
Yeah.
encapsulates what we're doing neatly. And I think we just have to accept that as much as we torture ourselves about what the best way of explaining it is. So we do think about that a lot. How do we make it land cleanly? And that was also to my point about being very focused on milestone-driven activity, apart from I think that's a fair business principle anyway, it's that you need to hold their hand and say, hey, look, chill. We'll go step by step. Your upside is going to be far greater than the downside, and we will make the economic case
Mm.
very clearly, accepting perhaps limited data,
The
but we're
thing
going to
that,
make you feel comfortable.
yeah, the thing that was behind my question was that if you accept the premise that community should be at the heart of a business model, the thing that was going through my mind was that actually shifts the responsibility for driving that forward, or at least leading it at a very high level, to the CEO. It's not a marketing function. I mean, it's something that marketing will be involved in, but if
Yeah.
it's at the heart of the business model, what's the role of the CEO in that context?
Well, yeah, absolutely right. I mean, the reason I said, I think I would say synonymously CEO, chief growth officer. I mean, clearly you may well want the CEO if you need the full buy-in and the sign off, but I think the principle is the same, which is that to you need someone on board who kind of is horizontal to the business and isn't sort of biased to fitting community to say think how they think about product or marketing or any particular function. I mean, the reality is, and why I think the centrality piece is important is that most organizations already have all the ingredients. It's not like I need to go to marketing because your marketing is
Right.
deficient. They have the customers, the fans, the members, whichever. They've got all the content, they've got physical spaces, perhaps if they're a restaurant chain, they've got digital touch points. The problem is that, and to repeat, and this is, I think, ties this together. The problem is that those assets often sit in silos. Therefore, to back up what you were saying, you need someone, whether it's the CEO or otherwise, who sits across the business, who
Mm.
can recognize those
Yeah.
silos and doesn't have any sort of
Yeah.
silo
That
bias.
Yeah, that was exactly
That,
what I was trying to get at.
yeah, I think that's your point. And you need to be able to, as I said, be that enable that kind of connective tissue across, so that again, value is not resetting after every campaign, event, purchase,
I mean, some of the
and
best
so on.
CEOs that I've met are by default at the heart of their communities.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's almost as if they're running a campaign, not a business. That's been my experience, which is quite interesting, actually.
yeah,
And it's also it's this to come back to what we were talking about a while ago. It's this idea of a new the evolving role of the CEO.
yeah.
If you accept the premise that community is a really important part of what a business does, building a community and maintaining and supporting and growing a community, if that's a really big part of what a business does, that's got
Mm.
to be a big part of what CEOs do. And the best CEOs I've come across are always saying to me, "I'm out talking to customers." I mean, you might use different language, but the other way of saying is, I'm out in the community."
I think what you're also, well, I'm going to put words in your mouth, but perhaps there is a sort of implicit sense that with that behavior comes a certain humility
Yeah.
that as a CEO or leader, you don't have all the answers. And whether perhaps if one's maybe earlier in one's career, as a founder, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that being a good CEO means having the answer and being the kind of the ultimate energy source. You're the one pushing everything forward, solving every problem. One of the benefits of community, by the way, it's not the only way to do this, but there's this idea that any business should think hard about distribution ahead of product. By which I mean form your community, form your audience, create value for them, then sell to them, right? And if you can do that, you can create your roadmap by just looking and listening, basically. It's not the only way because there is a sort of the sense that your audience doesn't always know what they want, right? So that's also true. So you want to kind of look at the wider market and have one's own sort of conviction of one's own ideas and hypotheses. But I think absolutely getting closer to one's audience matters, and I think therefore tying that to sort of being a good CEO or being a good leader then becomes less about trying to be the kind of the hero and answering all the questions, and more than about sort of trying to design the conditions in which basically good decisions can be made, and part of that is definitely being in the community or listening.
Yeah. I mean, I was about to ask you about decision making. I mean, how does that idea of having community at the heart of your business model, I mean, how does that change the way the CEO or the board should make decisions? I mean, does it mean more consultation? Is that what, I mean, I'm not sure that is what it means, but I mean, just give us a flavor of how you think if you're changing the business by saying we're going to build a community at the heart of our business model,
Mm.
how does that change the way the board and leadership team should approach decision making?
I think, well, one thing I think it means is that you essentially are creating enough trust. That's trust amongst your own employees and team, as well as you're obviously trusting your customers or fans. That was always, I think, one of the traditional things why brands historically were very unwilling to kind of let go, right? The idea of the days of, let your customers generate content or write the ads or have any influence in where we develop our product would is historically anathema. No, we make the decisions. We're in control. But if you can create enough trust that people can make decisions without everything running through you, just thinking about how you design things, then that makes a lot of sort of sense to me. Not
And
always
of course,
easy, of course.
trust is at the heart of sales, isn't it?
Yeah.
The building trust is if you like part of what you need to do to build sales.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, it's not always easy to do. Especially when thinking about like founder-led businesses, which I suppose where we are, early stage, because I mean, actually, we are completely imbued in the spirit of community, perhaps less hard for us personally, but in general, founder-led businesses often start with a lot in the founder's head, right? So
Yeah,
it's their taste, their judgment, their relationships,
yeah, there.
their commercial instincts, etc. So I think that challenge is how do you turn that into a system, that other people can operate inside?
And let me ask you, how would you say your values have influenced the way you've built your business,
How would
Chorus?
I say? Oh gosh, my
How have your values influenced the way you've built Chorus?
let me think about that. I think there are a few values that shape it. I think, and this is sort of startup mindset where time and bandwidth are limited, and I think therefore I generally have a low-ish tolerance for sort of very abstract strategy that sounds impressive but doesn't actually help people make better decisions. I mean, I love ideas and I love ideation and being sort of super creative and riffing, but I sort of want them also to touch the ground, I guess. I think with Chorus, the aim is not, and this is back to what we were saying about how do we ground chorus in something that our clients can really get hold of. Funnily enough, one of the questions that I'm working on how to answer better in those conversations is, but what is it exactly, what is it exactly that you're giving me? And sometimes when these things are a bit more conceptual and there's no one single answer, when there's no one, here's your campaign ticket, Mr. or Mrs. Brand, it's not always an easy answer. But I think therefore with us, the aim is not to sort of sell community as a beautiful concept. It's to help organizations make practical decisions about, where the relationships create value, where's value leaking, and what to build next, etc. So I think there's sort of that. I mean, these are some more sort of business values rather than sort of personal values of sort of kindness, honesty, and integrity, which are
No,
which
I mean, I
let's
think
call
I
those,
think
let's
that
call those let's call those foundational accepted. They're not sort
I
of
think your point about being practical is a well-made one. I mean, I think that's a really important component to business. I mean, one of the reasons I prefer business to, let's say, working in government or local government and working in the third sector is that businesses are, by their very nature, very practical. Because otherwise
yeah
they go bust. I mean, you can have grand theories, but if you don't make sales,
yeah
you're toast. So I think there's something inherently practical about business. So to pick up
yeah.
your point about being practical, I think that I see that as a good fit would be mine.
Yeah. I mean, other things are just thinking, I'm thinking again more slightly practical values, but I think like connectivity, is that a value? I don't know. But I've always, as I said, always been interested in people, networks, intros, relationships, and I say the slightly unpredictable ways that, opportunities can move when you build good trust. And actually, over time, a lot of my career has come through following those threads and just sort of investing in that all the time. And I think it's part of what I would call like the sort of hustler's mindset, always always expanding the network for its own sake, but always being open to, where something might go, always being prepared to give plenty before you get, because I think it all pays back. And I sort of I like to believe in that sort of circularity.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me ask you about something you sort of touched on there. I mean, one of the things that's happening at the moment is there's a very significant rise in cyber attacks, cyber threats.
mm,
You're talking about working with businesses and actually having a business where there is a lot of valuable data.
mm.
To what extent would you say has a fear of that, of being attacked, of losing data? I mean, has that sort of, I mean, I think it's kind of a scary time at the moment in business because so many businesses are dependent on data and there is so many people that are out to get that data. And, what's your take on decision making in the context of that kind of fear and uncertainty and doubt?
Look, accepting the kind of macro trend of everything that you say, which I don't sort of seek to debate because it's true. Um, uh, Look, we adhere to sort of good GDPR. We adhere
Right.
to and we follow all the measures to protect data as best we can. And, to some extent, like many others, we are reliant on platforms far bigger than ourselves who host that data for us. So we follow the right principles. But of course, it's a sort of a latent concern. And I think as we grow, as we build our proprietary data, then that becomes an increasing challenge. Um, but for us personally, accepting the kind of macro picture, no question about that, this challenge has not sort of hit us in a major way yet.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was just wondering whether you spend a lot of time thinking about making sure that it doesn't do any damage
You
to.
know what? I mean, look, I'll be just really blunt with you, and I don't want to sort of answer unfashionably, but like, if you said to me, like, what are the th three things you think about? winning new business, and winning new business. And in a way, other things are probably going to be like first world
Right.
problems that I'll be
Okay.
delighted to have when as we grow. There'll be natural teething problems.
Okay. Well, I'm going to
As we
hold you to that. When you
Right,
get
fine.
attacked, when you have a cyber attack, I'm going to
I
say, well,
think, oh,
you
why
should
didn't I
run
listen to
for
it? Yeah.
it. Yeah,
Why
yeah.
was I so blasé? I'm not being blasé, but yeah, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, no, I mean it's just an interesting question because it's one of those things that's out there in the environment, isn't it?
Yeah, 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 for sure.
What would you say you find most difficult about decision making? Because I mean, I mean, one of the things that adding communities does is it adds a layer of complexity, which inevitably makes decision making more complex. I mean, what's your take on the kind of difficulties around decision making as the CEO in that context?
Um, how do I think about this? Let me think about how I want to. I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, I sort of think about like the speed of decision as something as important,
Right.
and there's always this tension, I think, between like being decisive and quick versus sort of cogitating and ruminating, and there are sort of pros and cons. And I think in my position, the hardest decisions um, are not usually the clean, sort of strategic ones. I often find like they're human ones, actually. They're
Yeah, yeah,
about sort of
yeah.
their team shape, their roles, their who has the bandwidth, who's carrying the risk, who's creating momentum, who's better at this versus that. Those decisions can be very difficult because they involve trust, they involve sort of being fair, they're emotional uh, decisions. Those I find are the hardest ones. As a general rule of thumb, I like to be, I like to sort of absorb as much data as I can, but always accept imperfect data and be decisive, accepting that one is in an endless on an endless treadmill of making um, sort of educated bets about things, and that even when one has colleagues or other partners who are challenging you and either telling you to slow down or to do it differently, particularly with people decisions, but as a general rule, and there are other people who write on this more academically when they're sort of writing about sort of judgment, and that people, and as I'm a bit nervous about saying there's nothing wrong with a bit of data plus gut instinct, but I'm going to go with it anyway. But I know that some people kind of think that that's BS. Sort of gut instinct is sort of over romanticized. But when I think about particularly the sort of the human resource decisions some of us had to make in terms of moving people out of roles or moving people out of the business, as much as the data is telling me something, my gut, it's like sort of romantic relationships as well. There's a kind of a if you know, you know, right? And more often than not, you know, right.
Yeah, sure.
Um, Even more kind of strategic decisions like with the sports business syndicate, we moved the community from WhatsApp on to Telegram. Now, on paper, Telegram made complete sense because it had far better infrastructure, it had far better automation and onboarding and control and everything. So it had all the ingredients basically for a more sophisticated community operating system. But actually, and this is the sort of the hindsight, a reflection slash mistake about, how could I might have sort of reflected. Communities, particularly, this is particular to our world, don't just move on logic,
No.
right? They move when the habit and emotional payoff are strong enough. I mean, this is about across lots of business cases, but WhatsApp was incredibly messy and was operationally chaotic, but it was where people already lived. So essentially, you're just trying to sort of evict people from their comfortable home. Uh, while Telegram was like a smarter home, where for various reasons, a behavior change can be kind of more expensive than the kind of when one's trying to make sort of strategic decisions. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. And to what extent, I know the syndicate business was very successful, but to what extent has failure influenced the way you've built your business? I mean, I'm going to ask you about how success has influenced how you built your current business, but let's start with failure. Were there things that failed in the past, that mistakes that you made that have influenced what you're doing now?
Um, yeah, just sort of what I touched on there. I think one of the things that I've learned is that I suppose just firstly that like strategic logic and human behavior are absolutely not the same thing. If I had my time again with Sports Business Syndicate, I think I would have relaunched it on Telegram in a slightly different way with a different commercial model. But I think we convinced ourselves so much in our echo chamber of the sort of logical customer value of the proposition. And of course, we were so emotionally invested that we ended up drinking our own Kool-Aid a bit. I mean,
Which is easy to
SBS,
do, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, SBS was a success in very, I think, one important sense, which is that we built, as I said, this genuinely lively sports business community at senior people in the industry, real conversation, useful intros, opportunities, and all that level of trust. Actually, that's very hard to manufacture. So it proved something to me that was important. High trust network can create enormous value, but I think the mistake uh, that I made was assuming that if the strategic logic was right, the human behavior would naturally follow,
And it did.
and it didn't. And I think the mistake that then was somehow overweighting system elegance, call it, or the beauty of this new toy that we had built,
Yeah.
and underweighting habit.
Yeah.
And
You
obviously,
see
as I
that a
said,
lot, don't you? You see that a
yeah.
lot. Well, and what about the flip side? I mean, were there things that were particularly successful that you've then kind of played across into the new business? Are there things that have influenced how you've done things?
Yeah, I mean, like, I have a strong sort of startup background. I mean, the sort of the principles that I've taken from all the startup work that I've took into SBS and indeed into Chorus is that's what I'd call customer development in brackets, experimentation is the only kind of currency that matters, right? I mean, I talked about community is great because you can listen to your customers and help build your roadmap. I mean, there is a principle from my venture studio where I worked before where people would say, as a startup founder, if you haven't talked to 150 potential customers before you come and ask me for money, go away and do that.
Mm.
Build your case. And so that's sort of some of that spirit I definitely brought into Sports Business Syndicate, which is that we enjoyed going through build, measure, learn cycles of trying things and getting very quick feedback from the audience about how do we add more value. And sometimes whether that was surveys, whether that was one-to-one conversations, whether it was testing low cost kind of events and programs. And that was the kind of culture that I wanted to build in terms of how we grew the business, how we improved the
And
customer
that's
value.
pretty, I mean, that's a pretty powerful way of building a business. I think that kind of
Yeah.
test and learn kind of
Yeah,
approach.
of
I think
course.
really, because
Absolutely.
I think businesses evolve anyway. So
Hmm.
you either do it or it's done to you, if you see what I mean. So let
Yeah,
me ask
definitely.
you about, have you ever had a moment or a time when the business has outgrown your expertise, and how did that feel?
Oh God, I mean, I feel that all the time. Um, I mean, look, to some degree, I think some of the best people in business have some degree of imposter syndrome, right? I think it's healthy. Don't have too much of it because if you've got too much of it, you're an anxious wreck. So you've got to have the conviction and of your own ideas. You've got to have a certain amount of confidence and bullishness and belief. But I think general entrepreneurial quality is just a certain sort of bull in a china shop spirit of pushing through whatever. I mean, I better not swear, but F the experts and I'll go and show them I can do it.
Yeah,
Unless this is genuine rocket science, very little is impossible. And if I can't do it, uh, I'll find a way. Now, the world that we're living with chorus is that, we're learning all the time. We're
mm,
learning all the time because in some ways I think we are, I mean, I don't want to sound too grandiose, but kind of creative, you touch as creating a category here.
mm,
And we're very open about that. The development of our proposition is also born of listening to what our customers want. We don't feel that is set in stone. So learning all the time. Every time I come off a diagnosis or kind of proposal call with one of our clients, these are mentally taxing experiences because, and
yeah.
so they should be. And if they're not, then I don't think it's been worthwhile enough because if I'm not getting interrogated sufficiently, and if it's not making me think about our proposition and how we add most value,
Yeah,
then we're probably not kind of pushing
you're not
hard
pushing hard
enough. So
enough, are you?
I feel very challenged every day. I think there's a healthy edge, knife edge that one wants to be on. You don't want to be like going, I have no idea what I'm doing. Please don't let me publicize that idea. But I think a kind of a healthy
When somebody said to
ignorance.
me, to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, I mean that's that I'm afraid is the reality of being an entrepreneur. It can be these are all sort of cliches, but until you do it, the kind of the loneliness of it, the stress of it, it's like it's massive. These are all things that loads of people talk about. I don't think I'm telling you anything new by saying that, but obviously before I did this, before I went out and actually started things or ran things, you could only read about it. You only really uh, know it when you feel it when you're doing it.
It's a different experience building a business. And as you've, as it were, matured as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, would you say that your definition of good decision making has changed?
I've become more decisive. I sort of touched on this a bit because I'm more confident and then I know what I'm doing. I think I know like what are the kind of operational nuts and bolts which can make this thing work. So I've got more confidence in myself that to a reasonable extent, that I think I know what I'm doing or I know what direction I want to go in. And all those experiences that I've had compound to my benefit. And there is also I suppose, a sort of coping mechanism slash pattern recognition, which is that once you're in the hot seat or you're running a business with partners as well, it's not only me, of course, is that like survival instinct in a way takes over. You know you've got to make decisions. If you can see that whether that people aren't working, you know that this is becoming destructive. You get kind of quickly pushed. And I've kind of read and seen enough through observation that there's nothing worse than sort of decision drift. You know,
Well, so let me ask you
this is
about that.
far more one thing. I mean, it's far better to make a bad decision quickly than just to sort of let things drift and get into some kind of decision-making fog. I think that's bad for oneself. It's bad for the business. It's bad for kind of the culture around one's team, if that's how you're perceived.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting term that you've used there, decision-making fog, because sometimes it feels like that, doesn't it? When you're not quite sure which way to jump, it can
Yeah.
feel foggy. I think that's a good way to put it. Let me ask you about something similar, but in a slightly different way. When you look back, if you were to go back to the beginning, if you were to start from scratch, is there anything that you do differently, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I probably would have. I would have thought so. What would I do differently? I think if I was starting again. I think I sort of think about like separating, like thinking about the difference between like what is a clear opportunity and what is a sort of a theoretical
Yeah, that's a very good
strategy.
point, actually.
I think I'm quite good. Again, I sort of touched on seeing connections between people, markets, brands, ideas. I think that's I'm sort of good at, and that's sort of useful. I think, but the shadow side is that. And I'm definitely there's a bit of this sort of the ADHD quality that you end up sort of seeing too many possible directions, and you can mistake sort of optionality
Yeah,
strategy. I mean, for example, like with Sports Business Syndicate, for example, there were several plausible futures, with its paid community, media platform, events business, sponsorship vehicle, intelligence network, recruitment layer. So the problem was never like lack of opportunity. The problem was, again, we come back to decision making. The problem was deciding which opportunity had the strongest relationship between, member behavior and sort of commercial value and the operation reality in front of us. And obviously, as I've touched, and I don't think that was a perfect set of decisions. But I think over time, I have become, or I want to become more disciplined about asking, like, where's the real energy? Where's the real value? Where does the revenue like sit, and where should we deliberately not be going? And I think the same is true now as we get in the
And and
chorus
and,
world.
and those decisions are not easy decisions.
No, they're not. I mean, at best, they are. What one has to be comfortable. You touched on it about being comfortable with uncertainty. There are different sort of lenses. I mean, there's obviously the macro uncertainties, like is this thing going to be a success? But then there's sort of so many decisions that one's having to make on a more regular basis, and you just have to be comfortable making educated bets
Yeah.
with
I mean,
imperfect information. Like, am I going down the right strategy now? I think so. I think I'm, you want your antennae up all the time. Every conversation you have is another data point, not to sort of dehumanize everything that we
well,
do.
I was,
But
I was talking to somebody the other day who runs $1 billion a year business in California. And
yeah,
he said, I think he made a really interesting point of view. He said that he thinks people think about risk the wrong way. He said the risk is not making a mistake. The
yeah,
risk is not exploiting the opportunity. If you make mistakes in an attempt to exploit the opportunity, well, okay, you make mistakes. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it because I think people worry too much about getting it wrong. We always get it wrong. I mean, there are only two kinds of
yeah.
people in the world. There are people that make mistakes and people that pretend they don't. I mean, it just happens, doesn't it? So it's an
Oh,
interesting, very
yeah.
interesting point.
Always, yeah. I mean, and again, you want to be comfortable with making mistakes. I mean, again, I want to avoid cliche, but mistakes um, are learning
Yeah,
opportunities. I mean, when I had a former colleague, I mean, it was a bit glib, but he used to sort of say, feedback is a gift, or treat feedback as a gift. I mean, sometimes if someone's like just giving you a kick in the what's it's like it doesn't always feel like a gift. But if you have sufficient perspective to stand back, and if you're sufficiently kind of confident and
yeah,
aware that,
yeah.
you got to take the hits,
Yeah,
take the hits
absolutely.
and
And
learn.
I often think that I mean, it's lovely to get good feedback. When somebody says, "Oh, yeah, I
Yeah,
really enjoyed that." Actually, that's not much use to you. I mean, it's good for your confidence. It's good for your self-esteem. What you really want is when somebody says, "This bit don't work."
yeah.
That's the feedback that you want because then you can do something about it. I always think. One last question before we wind up.
Mm,
I mean, if you were to give some advice to a rookie
mm.
CEO starting out, what would the most important thing you'd be that you'd say to them? What is the most important thing they need to know?
Try and let me sort of phrase some of the sorts of ideas that we've been talking about into some advice. I think it would be like, don't confuse sort of keeping lots of options open with making progress. That isn't making
Yeah,
progress. By
that's a
which I mean, in
very
the
good
early
point.
days, it's really tempting to leave everything slightly open, like the proposition, the customer, the pricing, like your team, roles, product roadmap. You can, if you compound all that optionality, you risk being everything and nothing. You can call it flexibility. Sometimes it is, but after a certain point, flexibility can become sort of drift. So I think the CEO's job, as we've said, is not to have perfect certainty. It's just to create enough clarity for the business to move.
That's actually very good advice, I think. Daniel, thank you for making a bit of time to come and have a chat about what you do. I think this idea of putting community at the heart of a business model is really interesting and I think very timely, actually, given the way things are changing at the moment with AI. And well, it's actually a very timely way of thinking about how to move a business forward and how to build a business. So thank you for making a bit of time to come and have a chat with us and good luck going forward.
Thank you for having me, Paul, and a great pleasure.
Likewise. See you soon, Daniel. Bye bye.